Watch your talk. If you are just joining us, welcome to our Thursday webinar series. I'm Liz Perry, Crow Canyon's president. Very excited to be hosting our speaker today. But before I introduce him, we're just going to start with a couple of our usual introductory slides. We like to start with our land acknowledgement. The Crow Canyon Archaeological Center acknowledges the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Diné, and Hickory Apache people on whose traditional homelands our campus sits. Our work is not possible without Indigenous people in the past, present, and future, and we respectfully recognize and honor ancestral and descendant Indigenous communities for their contributions to all humankind. We are grateful to all Indigenous people, and we support the preservation and protection of cultural traditions, ancestral connections, and sacred lands. Thank you to all of our Indigenous partners and friends and employees. Thank you to all of you who support our mission. We can't do it without you. You are joining us on Zoom, and just a couple quick reminders. Zoom still gives us trouble, even after all these years, through and after the pandemic. But if you have questions at any point during the talk, you can put them in the Q&A, and they will be there waiting for our speaker. It's better to use the Q&A than the chat because sometimes people get to chatting in the chat and we have to scroll back to look to seek for the questions. If Zoom is driving you batty, we are live streaming on Facebook, so you can go to crowcanyon.org/Facebook to watch us. And I believe this talk and prior talks are up on our YouTube channel if you want to go back and revisit. We have some fantastic upcoming webinars, as usual. I'm biased as always, but some of these are special to us. In particular, next week we have the married doctors, Derek and Michelle Turner. Michelle Turner was a postdoctoral scholar at Crow Canyon during the pandemic. So we're really excited to see what they have to say. They'll be talking, this is part of the Four Corners lecture series as well. That we partner with locally, Leaving Traces, Fairy Houses, Kindness Stones, and Constructed Heritage with the Doctors Turner, Friends of Crow Canyon. Then we have a really fascinating talk about Easter Island archaeology coming up the following week. Recent and continuing research on Rapa Nui, Easter Island, resolves island mysteries with Dr. Terry Hunt with the week after that. So please keep joining us on Thursdays, everybody. Just a huge thank you from all of our staff. This is a free webinar series. So many of you give every single week when you sign up. We notice, we are so grateful. Thank you, thank you, thank you for donating to the series to allow us to keep offering this. This was the first thing, this was the brainchild of Taylor, who hides behind her picture, but this she came up with starting our webinar series when we could not travel in the pandemic, and we're just so thrilled that we are still going strong. We have some programs coming up. If you would like to join us in the flesh and not just on our webinar series, we have the archaeology research program for our citizen scientists coming up on human-environment relationships that you can register. We've got 2 different sessions coming up to work on. Really, this is also the brainchild of our executive vice president of our research institute, Dr. Susan Ryan, who has really designed a special program for folks this year to work on human-environment relationships in the Mesa Verde region. There's going to be a lot of different scholars. There's going to be Indigenous scholars. There's going to be Western scholars. There's this is a new program for us. We're very excited. So please consider signing up for one of our September sessions. And there's also a lot more information about it on our website. Without further ado, I am so excited to introduce Dr. Michael E. Smith, who is a professor of archaeology in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change at Arizona State University. He has conducted archaeological fieldwork at Aztec provincial sites in Mexico and directs interdisciplinary projects on early urbanism. He is director of the ASU Teotihuacan Research Laboratory in Mexico. His book, At Home with the Aztecs, An Archaeologist Uncovers Their Daily Life from 2016, won the Best Popular Book Award from the Society for American Archaeology. Welcome, Dr. Smith. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your research with us today.
Oh, thanks a lot, Liz. So I guess I want to share my screen. And start that. And flip that. There. Does that look right?
It looks perfect. You
Oh,
are good to go.
okay.
Aw, and thanks for putting our logo on.
Um, my topic is Aztec archaeological sites in Mexico. My wife, who's an editor and is watching this, pointed out last night, says, well, where else would Aztec archaeological sites be? It's nice to see a big audience. My daughter's in the audience. I've got some current students and former students. And so let's get started. First, a few words about the word Aztec. This comes up periodically. People I know are on Twitter. Um, People say the word Aztec is not a good word to use. You should use the word Mexica. And Aztecs is a made-up word. The people didn't actually have a term for the peoples of central Mexico on the eve of Spanish conquest. Mexica were the people of Tenochtitlan. They ran the Aztec Empire. It's sometimes called the Triple Alliance Empire, sometimes called the Mexica Empire. But you can't just replace the word Aztec by the word Mexica because the Mexica were just one of a number of ethnic groups. So here's the Aztec Empire. When I say the Aztecs, I mean people living in this middle circle, sort of Mexico City and the inner provinces around it today. Just the Central Valley of Mexico. These are some of the ethnic groups from Charles Gibson's book, The Aztecs Under Spanish Rule. As you notice, the Mexica are just one of these groups. In fact, they went and conquered these other groups. And so if you are a Chalca down in the lower right there, to say, well, you shouldn't call you the Aztecs, you should call you the Mexica. Well, they don't want to be called the Mexica. The Mexica were their conquerors and their exploiters. So the term Mexica can't just be substituted for the term Aztec. So anyway, when I say Aztecs, I mean the peoples of central Mexico. Time is spent, and I don't mean this. Aztec Ruins National Monument, because I guess the early people in this area thought maybe the Aztecs came from here, which maybe they did, but this is not an Aztec site. I'm going to be talking about civic architecture as a way of sort of organizing my talk. Those are buildings that have a special purpose. They pertain to more than one household. They're usually non-residential banks, churches, state houses today. Um, and Southwestern sites had civic architecture. Southwestern sites have houses and storerooms and kivas. Kivas would be an example of civic architecture. It's a special purpose building, pertains to more than one household. So what does civic architecture tell us? It tells us something about the lives of residents, what they did with their time. Tells us about political, economic, social, religious organization at a settlement or in a region. If there's a lot of temples, it tells us something about the religion, and so on. It also tells us something about the level of the city. In other words, sites that have a lot of civic architecture or really big civic architecture might be a more larger, more central settlement than those that have less civic architecture. So here's four levels: a village, a town, a city-state capital, and the imperial capital. The first three are ones that my wife, Cindy Heath-Smith, and I have excavated. And the last one is the main capital. It's Mexico City today. And you can see the kinds of civic architecture. The village, well, it doesn't have any. The town of Cuexcomate has a small temple, an elite residence, and a plaza. Yautepec as a city-state capital adds some more types of civic architecture. And you get to the imperial capital and you have quite a few things. In fact, this category, specialized chamber, there's lots of sort of specialized buildings that I didn't add on here. What about southwestern sites? Well, they'd be in here. They'd be sort of villages, towns, either none or a small amount of civic architecture. That would be sort of the southwestern equivalent of some of these Aztec sites. And then just to give you an idea, the population, the village would go from 100 to 800 to 13,000 to more than 200,000 people. So I'm going to go through these different types of sites and just show you what they look like. The villages, well, these aren't tourist sites. Capilco is a small village, 20 houses that we excavated back in the 1980s. There's a couple of houses. This is what the ruins look like. Pretty impressive, huh? You didn't even know there's anything there? Well, yeah, there's a house there. There's a stone alignment and a pile of rubble, and you clear it off and find something like this. This is not that particular one, but here's what these provincial Aztec houses look like. And that's what's at a village. It's these houses, but no temples or ballcourts or palaces or anything. Um, a town. Well, we'll look at Quescomate, which we excavated in the same field season as the village. Uh, and here's maps at the same scale. Quescomate is a bigger site, about 150 houses spread out along a ridge. And in the middle there, what's labeled as B is sort of the central plaza of the site. Has an elite compound, um, a plaza, and a temple, a special residence that we don't really know what that was. But these are things that aren't found at a village. And the plaza, it's important that the plaza is there. It says something about that site. Plazas were important in Aztec city planning when we get to the larger cities, the city-state capitals. Here's an image from an Aztec codex, a pictorial document, showing a plaza, and east is at the top, which is, I don't know, the way Aztec maps were done. And you see the big temple is at the top, and then there's a bunch of gods, and they're doing dances and ceremonies and things. So here's some other, the three across the top are city-state capitals, and then Quescomate, the town, is at the bottom. And they have similarities in their layout. These are not identical. It's not like there's a standard plan that all Aztec towns and cities followed, but there's certain principles. The main one is you have a plaza, and then that you have the largest temple at the site is on the east side of the plaza with the steps on its west side. And then the other buildings could be arranged various ways. At a town at Quescomate, in the lower right, that's what the structure looked like. It was a big mound. And we were only able to do some test excavation, but between our tests and mapping of this structure, we did the reconstruction. Kaga McLeod was the artist who did this. And we think this is an elite residence. It has a number of structures up on platforms laid out around a central patio. The site of Quescomate, the town, also had features that we called rock piles, which are piles of rocks. We didn't know what these were at first, but they were in very public locations. And when we removed the rocks, what we found, like in the lower picture, is very dense sherds, and not just any old sherds, but sherds that could be reassembled into vessels. Most of the trash deposits have lots of sherds, but you can't put vessels back together. Things were broken, they're thrown out, and they're just little individual fragments. In these deposits, it's like someone actually took the pots and threw them down and broke them. In fact, we think this is these are remains of the Aztec new fire ceremony. Every 52 years, the was an opportunity the gods had to end the world. The end of the world is going to come at the end of a calendar cycle. The calendar cycles are 52 years. And then everybody supposedly threw out all their goods and they broke all their pots and pans, and then they would start over. We're safe for a while. You know, the last 52-year cycle is 1975. I was an undergrad. We had a big party. We had a big end of the year party. Was the world going to end? Well, no, the world didn't quite end. But so 52 years later will be 2027. So you better watch out in 3 years. Could be the end of the world. Oh yeah, this pot. We found this pot there. This is one of the weirdest things. It's a jar with a base, which Aztec jars don't have bases. And then it has a big hole in the side. And I don't know if anyone knows what this is. Raise your hands. Of course, I can't see you. It's a drum. Skin was stretched across the top, and the hole in the side was a sound hole for the sound to come out. Just one of a number of types of musical instruments the Aztecs had. Double temple pyramids is a style of Aztec temple. Here's a few representations in the Aztec pictorial documents. It's basically a single base, has two stairways, and then two temples at the top. So Santa Cecilia, this is on the poster for my talk here, this pyramid, a view from the front. Um, if you read the guidebooks about this, it's in Mexico City. You'll read that there's a small platform next to a big platform. But this site, this building never looked like this. Okay, this building never had a small platform next to a big platform. And so why is that? What's going on here? Okay, the archaeologists in the audience may figure this out. Here's the clue. What's that? Um, that, do you know what that is? I can't ask you because this isn't a class. Oh, well. uh, this is an early stage building, and these are the late stage buildings. This whole thing um, had early stage, it was a small double stair pyramid, and then later they covered over the late stage. And what they did is on the left side, they excavated down and restored the early stage, but they left the end of the stairs of the late stage on the left there. On the right, they restored the late stage. And restoration here included not just, building the pyramid back up to its level, but making up a bogus temple on top of it. There's no basis for what that temple looks. Well, there is a slight basis, but it was basically made up. There's no evidence at this site for what that temple on top looked like. Another Aztec town, Cihuatecpan, in the Teotihuacan Valley. It's a bunch of houses sort of spread out around a hill. So we'll move on to city-state capitals. This is the standard form of city for the Aztecs. Yeah, they had an empire, but sort of the empire, before it expanded, the whole central Mexico was divided up into these small polities or city-states, and each one had a capital. So just a chronology here. Teotihuacan, it fell, and then you have the growth of Tula, another big city, 900 to 1100. City-state capitals then got going, and then finally Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, imperial capital, came later still. So we'll start with Teopanzolco. This is a cool site, one of my favorite sites in central Mexico. This is what it looked like in 1910. And during the Mexican Revolution, the Zapatistas, Emiliano Zapata, and his troops were shelling the federales who were down in downtown Cuernavaca, because this is the hill sort of overlooking downtown. And their cannons were, let me go back here, their cannons were on top of the pyramid here. The vibration from the cannons shook loose the dirt, and they saw the walls that this was actually a structure, not just a hill. And so this is one of the first excavations of a site after the Mexican Revolution. And unfortunately, there's no documentation of the excavation. There's no description, but you can visit it today. And if you don't know anything about Emiliano Zapata, you should look him up. He's one of the true heroes of the 20th century. Here is where that site is located. This is Cuernavaca, part of the city, modern city of Cuernavaca. And in the middle of that square is a rectangle. That's the pyramid we were just looking at. For quite a few years, this is where we lived. My wife and Cindy and our daughters, April and Heather, lived in Cuernavaca, where the blue dot is. There's another view of Teopanzolco. There's a close-up, had the standard Aztec plan, a big pyramid on the east side, a T-shaped building on the south, maybe a palace, we don't really know. A bunch of little platforms along the west side. And it basically takes up a square block in Cuernavaca today, and that's all that's preserved. There's the double stair pyramid, and there's Cindy walking across the plaza there for scale. Okay. Here's another city-state capital from the early Aztec period, Tenayuca. And you wonder what's going on with the stairs here. Well, it's sort of like the Santa Cecilia example. There's an early stage and a late stage, and so they reconstructed the stairs from both stages, which is why it looks sort of funny with two stairways. In fact, it has 6 construction stages. Stage 3 or 4 would probably be similar in size to the one we saw at Teopanzolco, and then stage 5 and stage 6, it's quite a large pyramid. It has a bunch of small altars. It has some snake sculptures down the side of the temple there. Here's the 6 stages and some of the kinds of pottery that's found in the construction fill inside each stage. And it has a skull platform. Sometimes it's called skull platform. Sometimes it's called a tsitsimime platform. This is one of the types of altar at Aztec sites. You look at the lower right there. You have a little platform thing with sculptures of skulls on the outside, but then there's a chamber, and in the chamber is this mural painting that has skulls and crossed bones. And this was a platform. The skull and the bones were symbols of fertility. And the image on the top right from a codex shows a god standing there, showing this sacred nature of this platform. That's Tenayuca. Again, it's in Mexico City today, central area, walled off and preserved as a site you can visit. Coatzacoalco, another city-state capital. It's got the big pyramid on the east. It's got a ball court on the west side. It's got a T-shaped building there on the south. This is in not too far from Cuernavaca in the state of Morelos. This was excavated by Mexican archaeologist Raul Arana. And in my dissertation research, I studied the pottery from this site. Here's what some of the buildings look like. It's not a huge pyramid. This is a single stair pyramid on the top left there. The lower left is the ball court. The top right is also the ball court, showing these little platforms or shrines outside the ball court. There's a sculpture that was found in one of these platforms. Circular temples. Circular temples were dedicated to the god of wind, the Aztec wind god, Ehecatl, evidently did not like corners, liked to be able to flow around the building without getting stuck on corners, or so the story goes. This is from an Aztec myth. There's my wife Cindy again, as a scale on the Kalishlahuaca on the top left there. But if the wind god didn't like corners, why did they stick these rectangular stairways onto these things? I don't know. So here's the Kalishlahuaca example again. This is when we visited the site many years ago, but we ended up doing an excavation here, not of the temple, but of houses. And one reason that archaeologists confirm that these circular temples were indeed dedicated to the wind god, as the written sources say, is this sculpture here. This is a larger than life-size figure. This guy is about 7 feet high. And this is a god impersonator. It's a priest, and he's got a duck-billed mask on, and that duck-billed mask basically turned him into the wind god. And this was found buried in that platform where the arrow shows. And this was excavated in the 1930s. There's a circular temple in the Mexico City metro. This may be the Aztec pyramid viewed by the most people on any given day, because this is a busy point of intersection between two metro lines in Mexico City, and thousands of people walk by this little pyramid every day. And you can see several stages. You see a circular one at the very bottom, and then a platform and another circular. There's at least 3 stages of construction. So it's pretty cool when they're building the metro, putting in the metro in Mexico City. They're going right through Aztec sites, right and left. And a lot of good excavation was done. In this case, they just restored the temple and left it there for people to see. These small altars that I mentioned, I just want to show them again. Almost all urban sites, Aztec city-state capitals and Tenochtitlan, have a lot of these small altars. Some of them were special purpose, and some of them we don't really know their purpose. But they were very important to an Aztec sense of a city. The city has to have these small altars. Here's Here's another example, Tlatelolco in Mexico City. You see some circular altars, some rectangular altars. Um, there's just quite a few of these things. This one on the top is actually a Teopanzolco in Cuernavaca. You see a little chamber in the top there. That's a chamber that I think about 80 or 90 sacrificial burials or burials of skulls with cervical vertebra were excavated. Um, this was excavated in the 1970s. I came along in the, it wasn't well published. I came along in the 1980s in my dissertation work and studied the ceramics, including some of the vessels that were in this offering. But I had no idea what this offering was about. This hadn't been published yet. I didn't know about the bones. And then I met a Mexican physical anthropologist. He was visiting here at ASU when we first arrived in 2005 or 2006. Turns out he had excavated the bones here and analyzed the skulls and didn't know anything about the pottery. I had analyzed the pottery, didn't know anything about the bones, and we met and talked decades later. So this is the site of Tula, which is not an Aztec site. This is pre-Aztec. This is long before the Aztecs. The Aztecs looked back to Tula as a great ancient settlement, the home of the Toltecs, who were their ancestors. But the Aztecs went and did some excavation. The Aztec king sent people up to dig around Tula here, and then they built a little altar. It's like they decided, let's turn this ancient site into an Aztec city. And how do you do that? You put in a little altar. So this little altar you see on the foreground here is a Aztec addition, whereas the rest of that building is a Toltec building at Tula. Palace is another type of building. This is the standard form of a palace, both a royal palace and a palace of nobles. If you look at the one from Kalixtlahuaca, the drawing there, you walk in a single entrance and there's a big plaza. Straight across from the entrance is a raised platform, which was probably a temple or a shrine. And then the rest of the building consists of rooms built on top of platforms. On the right is a image of a royal palace in one of the Aztec codices. And so you enter from the bottom there, the single entrance. You have a plaza, a bunch of important people are sitting around there. There's some fires burning with incense. You have rooms built up on platforms, and then opposite the entrance is a special room. And so it really sort of confirms the sort of standard plan of Aztec palaces. Special purpose Aztec buildings, Aztec motels, Aztec train stations. I'll stop there. I could go on. I have lots of slides of funny Aztec things from from today. Ball courts. The Mesoamerican ball court goes way back, long before the Aztecs. Big capital I-shaped structure with stone rings, and they used a rubber ball. And the idea was to try to get a goal with the rubber ball, but you couldn't use your hands or your feet or your head. So I don't think they scored a lot of goals. We don't know very much about how they actually played. But trying to get the ball through the ring was part of the action. Ball court models, these are from some offerings at temples, as well as obsidian model of a ball from a ball game. Here's some images of ball courts from the codices. The balls they made were rubber balls, and they were really bouncy. A friend of ours, a colleague, Dorothy Hosler, taught for many years at MIT, and she studied ancient materials science, and she figured out how they made the rubber. It's from the rubber plant, and you put a certain enzyme in, and it converts it into it's a kind of a squishy, I don't know, a squishy rubber ball, but it really bounces. She visited us on her way back from the field. She had been down in Chiapas, Mexico, where people are still using this technology for rubber. And she was bringing some of these back for analysis. And Boy, you'd bounce it. It's like a super ball, only they're not hard like a super ball. They were soft. Uh, she wasn't amused when the dog who was living with us there started chasing it, thinking it was a dog toy. Um, Otumba, another city-state capital, lots of craft workshops. This one's been studied by Deborah Nichols and Tom Charlton. It's not much to look at. There's no standing architecture. There's no temples, pyramids, palaces. But there's lots of evidence on the surface for production of obsidian tools and groundstone and ceramic figurines and so on. So if you want to know more about Aztec city-state capitals, read my book. Um, Aztec city-state capitals, 2007, University Press of Florida. And one of the reasons I wrote this book was most of the attention among Aztec archaeologists who work on the Aztecs was focused on Tenochtitlan, the Templo Mayor, or the big sites like Tlatelolco and Tenayuca. And there were lots of these smaller sites that had been excavated and were important sites for Aztec society, for Aztec city-states, and not much was known about them. The information was scattered in obscure reports, and so I just tried to gather all this together, and so that's my book. So we'll move on now to the imperial capital, which has more civic architecture than any of these others. And so greetings from Tenochtitlan. Now, there's a Swiss guy, Thomas Cole, has created these incredible maps of what Tenochtitlan looked like in Aztec times. And we're going to see if this screen sharing works. Oh, darn. No, I don't. This is what I want. Can you see that, the Tenochtitlan?
Yep, we can.
Okay. Um, what this is this is what Tenochtitlan would have looked like. Cole really worked on this. He consulted me. He consulted a bunch of Aztec experts and put a lot of effort into creating these maps of that are quite realistic, right? An island in the middle of the lakes. But what I want to show you real quickly, and then I'll let you go at your leisure to the website because I encourage you all to do this. He created these slider maps, which here's Mexico City today, and here's the exact same view of Tenochtitlan in 1500. So if you look at the major temple there, the tallest temple there, it would have been located right near the Zocalo in downtown Mexico City. And I just love being able to do this, and it's about as accurate as you can possibly be. Here's another example. Of course, one thing you notice is okay, there's the city, the sacred precinct in the middle there with with the civic architecture, canals going through the city, and then Mexico City today, which it's a lot more polluted and murky than Tenochtitlan was in the past. Here we are again. You see the snow-capped volcanoes in the distance. We're looking to the south, toward the southeast. There's Popocatépetl, which is active today, and Iztaccíhuatl, the two snow-capped volcanoes. Here's some older and smaller volcanoes in the Valley of Mexico. And today, what had been the lake is just Mexico City. And the part that had been the downtown ceremonial district is downtown Mexico City. I'll show one more of these. This is the hill where the new fire ceremony took place, where they had at the end of 52 years, the priests would wait to see, are we spared another 52 years or the God's going to destroy the world? And when they saw the Pleiades constellation rise, that was a signal that the sun would soon rise. And so they were sitting up in this temple on this hill here. And then they said, okay, the Pleiades is rising. We're spared another 52 years. They started a new fire because all the fires had been put out supposedly throughout the kingdom, and they made a new fire, and the new fire got spread all over Mexico, and people bought new pots and pans and relit their fires and everything. And this temple is still there today. the ruins of it, but here's what's in the background. Mexico City. This is luckily preserved as a park up on top of the hill here. So I encourage you to visit this um, uh, to visit this website, and I need to get back to my presentation and maximize that and switch the display settings. There. Okay, so really cool stuff by Thomas Cole. Show Thomas Cole slide. Well, I already did that. This looks pretty crummy in comparison. This is my map of Tenochtitlan. But one thing you see is the central area, the central ceremonial zone with the Templo Mayor and all those buildings. Tlatelolco up to the north here, but a lot of the area around the city are chinampas, these raised fields that were growing crops on the edge of the city. There's a Diego Rivera painting of Tenochtitlan. Shows, I guess, a market and looking east toward the downtown area across a causeway. The chinampas, they're called raised field. They're raised fields. They're called floating gardens, which is ridiculous. Gardens don't float. The only thing that floats is the canoes, but it's a very intensive agricultural method, very high yields, and they're still farming a few of these today. Up until the 1950s, they were still very active in a major part of the Mexico City sort of fruit and vegetable market, flower market. And here's a guy from the early part of the 20th century in what's left of the raised fields. So there's a sacred precinct, the Templo Mayor on the left, and a bunch of these specialized shrines and buildings around it. This shows where the Templo Mayor of the Aztecs is in Mexico City. If you visit Mexico City, the lower corner here, what you see in the bottom is the Zocalo, the central plaza. That's the cathedral there, and then in the lower right, that corner of a building is the presidential palace, the National Palace of Mexico, so downtown Mexico City is built right over downtown Tenochtitlan. In fact, the Templo Mayor has been extensively excavated. It was torn down, right? The Spaniards tore down the pyramid, but what remained was the bases, the lowest levels of each of the different stages of construction. And there's something like 7 stages of construction. The earliest one is under a roof there on the left. And then you see successive sort of lower parts of stairways. And all around here were many offerings. These little flint knives with faces on them are sort of cute. On the right, there's an offering. There's stone sculptures, there's ceramics, there's a crocodile skull, there's coral, there's conch shells, there's just all kinds of things. These are symbols of fertility, and hundreds of these offerings have been excavated around the Templo Mayor in Mexico City. Major sculptures, a lot of major sculptures, big stone sculptures, multi-ton in size, have been found there, partly from the excavations of the subway that went on in 1967. You see the red dots shows the route to the subway. And so Tenochtitlan is full of these fancy sculptures and things. There's a skull rack. Now the actual skull rack has been excavated a few years ago. It's quite impressive. These are just some depictions of skull racks. These were the victims of human sacrifices that were sort of piled up next to pyramids. These skull platforms, or sometimes tzitzimime platforms, are interesting. It's a skull and a crossed bones, which was not a symbol of sort of death or terror or pirates. It was a symbol of fertility and the continuity of life and death. And here's an image of the god on the right, and on the left, top left, is a curer, a woman who is a curer, and she is doing some kind of ceremony in front of one of these skull platforms. It's just an example of the special purpose architecture, the special purpose kinds of civic architecture that you find, again, more of in the imperial capital than in the city-state capital. Here's this one I already showed it at Tenayuca with the mural painting and so on. So why is it hard to study Aztec cities today? Well, when the Spaniards came in, they basically took over Aztec cities and built their cities on top of them. Mexico City, it was called the City of Mexico, became quickly the capital of the Spanish colony of New Spain. In Cuernavaca had been called Cuauhnahuac, and I don't know what happened. The Spaniards couldn't pronounce Cuauhnahuac, so they called it Cowhorn, Cuernavaca. This had been a city-state. The Teopanzolco site that I showed earlier is located not too far from here. And Cortez himself built this palace, this big, ugly, blocky building, right over the top of the palace of the king of Cuauhnahuac. So you can see the steps there. Those are the steps from the Aztec royal palace that was once here. And that's why it's hard to study Aztec cities, is that a lot of them are underneath Spanish colonial cities and modern cities. Cities that have been more extensively excavated are cases where we found Aztec cities that are not completely buried by later cities. So here's Tlatelolco again. This is now part of Mexico City. It's called the Plaza of the Three Cultures. You have the Aztec temple. Again, multiple stages there. You have the stage 2 and is the earliest stage you see there, and then a bunch of the lower stages of the steps surrounding it. So it's Aztec culture. Then you have the colonial culture, an early colonial church that was built there, and then modern is apartment buildings there. So this is why it's hard to study a lot of these cities today. So what if we want to know about the lives of the Aztec people? Here's a few images from the Codex Mendoza. A woman's teaching her daughter to grind corn. Here's a guy in a canoe. Suppose we want to learn about what life was like for the Aztec people. Is this what we want to do? We want to study the central ceremonial zone of Tenochtitlan? No, this is not where we're going to learn about daily life of the Aztecs. We're going to learn about it from excavating the houses where Aztec people lived. And so this is the book that Liz mentioned earlier. It won a prize, best popular book on archaeology from 2017, At Home with the Aztecs. Look at that image there. That's for the Codex Mendoza. When two Aztecs got married, they literally tied the knot. They tied their clothing together, and that was a symbol of getting married. The book tells 3 stories. It tells about the Aztec households and communities that we excavated. It tells about how doing archaeology in Mexico. How do we find sites? How do we excavate sites, and so on. And it's also just a personal story about Cindy and me and raising our kids in Mexico. And this guy doesn't always read books on the Aztecs, but when he does, he likes to read Mike Smith. So that's fine with me. So back to these remains. If we want to learn about the lives of the Aztec people, this is the kind of thing we want to study. I mean, pyramids and civic architecture are great. They give us a lot of information. But if we want to learn what life was like, then it's sort of humble remains like this and basic houses and trying to find the sites that are not completely buried and covered over by colonial and modern buildings. So this is a fairly modest house. This is pretty typical for houses of people in the provinces of the Aztec Empire, where we excavated for many years. There's my wife, Cindy, who excavated this house we see in the background here. She's doing scientific research here. We need to look at the technology that was used to make tortillas in the ancient world. Right? There's a stone metate where the corn is ground. There's a tortilla griddle, a ceramic griddle. It's called a comal. And the tortillas are made by hand and cooked on a comal. I mean, they don't do this every day. All right, people in rural areas of Mexico, they're not pulling out the metate and the comal every day, but for a special occasion. This was a fiesta. Um, and so I'm getting hungry here. There is nothing as good as a handmade tortilla cooked on a fire. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so Cindy's not doing that because she likes tortillas. She's doing that as sort of scientific research of how, the ancestors of these people may have made tortillas. It is actually remarkable that this technology for making tortillas is almost the same. The major difference today is the woman in the background here has a cast aluminum tortilla press, right? And so in Aztec times, the people living in this area, living at this site, who were in very good chance of being the ancestors of this woman here, not a Cindy, but the woman next to her, they would have used a metate like the one in the lower right. They wouldn't have had a beer bottle. Okay, so forget the beer bottle. They would have had the metate to grind the corn. They would have had the comal, almost identical, and they would have made their tortillas just by hand without the tortilla press. So some elements of technology have survived across the centuries. So when we dig these sites in the Aztec provinces, is this what we find? No, we don't find anything at all like this. This is what we find. Lots of potsherds. At Yautepec, we excavated 1 million potsherds. And so it's a lot of work just to get these analyzed. I think our labs in Mexico would not be all that different from probably some labs in the Southwestern U.S. There's tables with lots of artifacts and students counting and weighing and entering data. And so we're not dealing with, the Aztec calendar stone and fancy sculptures. We're dealing with potsherds and trying to reconstruct daily life. Just some of the artifacts at these sites. Flutes in the top left, obsidian blades, bronze technology. We have bronze sewing needles and axes and things in the middle, ceramic figurines, polished quartz pebbles. We don't know what those were for, but we found those. Bark beaters that were used to make what's called bark cloth. It's bark paper. And tortilla griddles, bean pots, and so on. Here's our daughter Heather and daughter April. They basically grew up in Cuernavaca, and at one point we figured they had lived more of their lives in Mexico than in the U.S. because the whole time I was teaching, first at Loyola University in Chicago and then at SUNY Albany before I came to Arizona State. But we'd go down every summer. We'd go down quite often during the year, and the girls would be in school in Mexico. Our daughter April didn't really like working at the screen there. And there's Heather with her buddies going to day camp. Yautepec, we were excavating at Yautepec in those last scenes there. It's a modern Mexican town. And there's a palace, an Aztec royal palace. And what says formerly open fields, we were going to excavate there, but there was a squatters invasion and they filled up the land before we could excavate. And that's a whole story of its own. But we did find areas to excavate, open fields around Yautepec where we got permission and excavated a bunch of houses. So we found this house in the schoolyard. Here's another house not too far away. And it's things like this that give us the information about how people lived in the past. And in this sense, Aztec archaeology is not all that different from Southwest archaeology. We're digging houses, we're looking at the architecture, we're looking at the artifacts, we're reconstructing patterns of life and as how it changed through time. Lots of lectures to school groups. There's so many sites in Mexico. There's no way that the government can protect them all. And so how do sites get protected? Well, the best way when sites are protected is when people living in the area know about them, learn about them, take responsibility. And so we put a lot of effort into public education. So on the top left is a primary school. We were excavating in the background. You see one of the students at a screen. At the lower right is a secondary school, like a junior high. And we're showing them what we're doing in the excavations. at the site of Kalislawaka. It's best known for the circular pyramid here and a couple of other kinds of pyramids. But we did a project there. ASU did excavations there, and we didn't touch these things. Well, we didn't have a permit to touch these things, but I'm glad because I don't want to excavate stuff like this. I want to excavate things like this. What we did is we found houses and we excavated houses, and that gave us information about the way of life at Kalislawaka. So if you want to visit Aztec sites, you can see civic architecture. You can see these sites, and they're really cool. Most of them are not too far from Mexico City. But if you want to learn about life in the past, life for the Aztecs, it's the sites where we've excavated houses and residences. And that's sort of the story I tell in my book. The main messages of the book, Aztecs were not sacrificial maniacs. Archaeology can reconstruct ancient households and communities. And I show how these households and communities achieve sort of successful and sustainable and prosperous ways of life. And subliminal advertising, can't get rid of it, can we? And so that's the end of my talk, and I think there's time for questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. What spectacular talk, and you are speaking to the hearts of us in the Southwest who also believe strongly in household archaeology and community level archaeology, and so I know that you have a number of Southwestern archaeologist fans in the audience as well. As your family, big fans. I think you're getting a little bit of pushback for the child labor apparently employed by your own daughters in working in those excavations. One child labor or fabulous opportunity. I guess it depends on who you talk to. I don't know if you want to go ahead and take a look at the Q&A too. I usually kind of facilitate some of it, but some you do. It seems like one of your family members is in the Q&A and some specific questions. If you wanted to take a look at that yourself as well.
Hello from all these areas.
Oh no, that's the chat. But
the Q&A. Why the altars? Good question. You know, it's something I noticed when I wrote that book, and I'm looking at plans from all these Aztec city-state capitals, just how many of these small altars there were, and people had not really remarked on that. And it's I don't know, it's just part of the public ceremonies, and I don't know why Aztec sites have more of these altars all over the place than do sites, you know, earlier sites like Teotihuacan or Tula. So I don't know why the altars. I see a couple questions here. Cole's 3D reconstruction. Would there be canals next to the central precinct? Well, the whole city was an island. The whole city was an island, and the Chinampas were around the outside of the island. And there were canals quite through the city. We know where a bunch of them were from detailed mapping of early colonial periods, and others are sort of his reconstruction of where they might have been. Are the skull Tsutsumima platforms a form of skull rack? No. See, that's one thing people had said. Oh, these skull platforms are representations of skull racks, and they're really not at all. And it turns out that they have to do with fertility. They have to do with women's ritual. And it's really a completely separate operation from the skull rack. And are the polished quartz pebbles burnished, like used to burnish the pottery? Well, that's a very good, that's a likely interpretation. I don't really know for sure. This is sort of jumping around. I'm having trouble with.
Yeah, I can take over for you. I just wanted to make sure that you chose the questions from your family, but one of the last images you showed of a circular structure, is that a rendering or a reconstruction, or is that intact?
I think it's the one at Kalislawaka, and it's intact. It's been excavated and restored in the 1930s, and now it's a tourist site today. You can visit it today. Yeah.
One of our viewers wants to know what has been your favorite excavation site?
Favorite excavation site. I think Queshcomante and Capilco. We were sort of excavating those together. Queshcomante, the town site, Capilco, the village site. And this was before cell phones, and we would be out in the countryside. It was peaceful, not interrupted, and it was just a very pleasant place to be. And the archaeology was great. Uh, we dug at Yautepec, and Kalislawaka were both good archaeology and excellent, but they're located within modern cities. And so, you're interrupted more, and it's just not, being out in the countryside away from things is great.
No, absolutely. You can control your public education opportunities a little better out in the countryside than if you're being surveilled.
Yeah. Kathleen Dungan, who came to Mexico with us many years ago, mentioned women's spinning artifacts. Yeah, I didn't really get to talk about that. Lots of spindle whorls and little bowls that we think were used in spinning cotton. And we have cotton pollen. And so cotton was being grown in this area, and every single household had spindle whorls and spinning bowls. And so cotton spinning was sort of a major part of domestic activity. And we don't have the direct evidence of weaving because it's not ceramic. It will just be wooden tools and cloth. But the ceramic objects give us direct evidence of spinning, and it's a real common occupation at all of these sites, all these Aztec sites. What's the website for Cole's maps? Look up Thomas Cole, Kole, Tenochtitlan. That's what it's. I don't know. I think that's what it is, or maybe.
I bet Taylor can find that and pop it in the chat for folks who are still there. It's for people to copy.
Safe to excavate in Mexico. Well, Mexico today is a lot less safe than it was back in the day, and some parts of Mexico are very safe, and other parts are not. And I go down quite a bit to Teotihuacan these days, and Teotihuacan is in a very safe area. But there's other places. I had a colleague who had done field work in Western Mexico in an area that drug gangs are moving into, and they'd be coming back from the field, and the highway would be blocked by a bus on fire, and
wow.
be robbed and so on. So there's a lot of variation in Mexico to how safe things are today. Although looking back at, us having kids down there, and doing quite a bit with the kids and going all over the place back in the, the 1980s and into the early 90s. I'm not sure we'd want to do that today.
Right. Somebody, just a little follow-up on that for some of the folks who are interested in that. Do you have any kind of pointers with respect to, if you're going to visit, if you're going to look at the possibility of archaeological research in Mexico, do you have any suggestions along those lines in terms of practicing safely?
Well, there's sort of basic safety procedures in traveling in general. And you can see quite a bit in Mexico City, and most parts of Mexico City are fairly safe. But there's lots of guidelines around about, how you take cabs and just things you do to remain safe. And it's more difficult if you're out in the countryside, but you need to find out, some parts of the countryside are fine and some you're not, certain. We were doing a survey in the Yautepec Valley, and there were rumors that there was a gang robbing people out in the countryside. And I had students walking around finding sites out in the, I never had any trouble at all. And one of the students, Lisa Montiel, my student in Albany, was engaged to a Mexican guy, and he said, "It's not safe for you guys to be out there. I'm going to come out there with you." So the day he goes out with them, they got robbed.
Oh dear.
And they stole the camera, And, you know, this was film and they stole the camera, and Lisa's trying to say, could I at least rewind the film? And so we have some, and then they were excavating burials. So there were some burial photos that we just don't have.
Right. Oh, that's a shame. I think maybe if you want to take this last question, and then I think we're pretty much at time. There's a question about, has there been research on figurines with respect to spinning?
Spinning. I don't know of any ceramic figurines that depict spinning or weaving. I mean, they're in the Maya case. The Maya figurines from Haina and all that actually show people weaving, but
Mm-hmm.
although the figurines of people show textiles,
Hmm.
and particularly women with skirt on. The skirts have geometric designs, and so in that sense, the figurines relate to the textiles, I guess.
Fantastic. All right, the last question that popped up in the chat. Have you used LiDAR in your work?
No, I have not used LiDAR. Basically, what I've done is excavated houses. And LiDAR is great when you have heavy vegetation and you can sort of see through the vegetation. So it's giving us all these great results from the Maya. But where I work in central Mexico, I mean, LiDAR will give you a detailed, fine-grained topographic map of the surface, but you can basically see the surface. You don't really
Right.
need the LiDAR so much. I mean, LiDAR has been run at Teotihuacan, but it's not like we learned much new from it.
Mm-hmm.
We just got another
Right.
map of the surface of the ground, and so in central Mexico, we're not doing a lot of LiDAR, no.
Right. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Smith. To be respectful of your time, there's lots of compliments in the chat if you want to scroll through and see the thank yous. Really wonderful presentation. And thank you to your entire family for participating in your research and for jumping in and watching the webinar today too. And we will definitely be, I think we actually do have a copy of your book in the Crow Canyon Library, but we'll grab a couple extras to spread around the lobby for our visitors. So
Okay.
we fully approve of the book promotion. We do that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, thanks. You've been a good audience, good questions, and good to see students and old friends and so on. So
Fantastic. Well, you have an open invitation to come up from Tempe when it gets to be 117. It can be a nice trip up to Cortez and stay on campus and come and talk to some of the Southwesterners up here.
oh well, I might take you up on that.
That would be lovely. That would be lovely. All right. Thanks so much for everyone for watching. Thank you, Dr. Smith, and we will see you next Thursday.